And, and I was shocked as much as she was. But then it was kind of funny. We've been part of the CrossRoads family since 1980. In fact, before it was called CrossRoads, it was Oro Park in Red Deer. And now we're on the outskirts of Red Deer. And Kathleen and I got married in 79, and I grew up in central Alberta. We moved into Red Deer in 1980 and started looking for a church, and we found Oro Park Church. When we started coming to Oro Park, if we look at our background, both Kathleen and I grew up in churches and parents that were fully engaged in the ministry of the church. And so when we showed up at Oro Park we were like 20, 19, all we knew was to roll up our sleeves and jump in and start working. We were involved in just many different places, and in children's Sunday school, I started teaching adult Sunday school. And it wasn't long before I was leading all of the Sunday school. Both Kathleen and I started working with youth, and when we didn't have a youth pastor. And so all the way along, we were just doing what you're supposed to do when you join a church and you help out from many different directions. And I don't remember exactly how old I was. I was probably, I think, 25, 26 maybe, when Willard Swalm, the pastor at the time, came to me and said, "Hey, would you mind chairing our church board?" And so the church signed off on me, and ever since that time I've been involved in some level of leadership over the years, either sitting on the board or chairing the board, being part of search committees for various pastors. And that's just been a part of our life for years and years. And so even when we moved from Oro Park to CrossRoads, it was during that time where I stepped away for 3 years because of my job. I was in Calgary and Edmonton. But we just never ever lost sight of Oro Park. In fact, I think even during that time, we still tithed towards back to the church in Red Deer. And we had a really hard time finding a home church in Calgary, Edmonton. And when we end up coming back for the role that I'm in right now, it was like coming back home. And it felt really good. I remember being on the search team for Pastor Glenn Fretz. But then along comes Pastor Glenn Fretz decides to step aside after about 9 years. And I remember in 1996, I led the search for our new pastor, which is Pastor Dan. So Dan and I joke a little bit. I was part of hiring him in 1996, and in 2004 he hired me because I was in Edmonton at the time, and he gave me a call. It was on our wedding anniversary. I thought he was calling to say happy anniversary. Instead he said he never even remembered it was our anniversary. And he called me and he said, "Hey, would you consider coming back to CrossRoads and being our executive pastor?" And so that kind of threw me for a loop. I was in IT. I was making really good money and getting settled in Edmonton because we'd only been there for 9 months. And then he throws this at me, and I had to process that. Kathleen and I created 2 big lists of the reasons why we shouldn't come. And we had I think there was only 2 things on the list as to why we should come. And one is our friends, our home church, we miss them. And the second one was maybe God's calling me. And I had to process those 2 things. And I think the list that we had for the reasons why we shouldn't come was easily 3 pages long. And so that was that 3-month process that we had to go through. And in the end, the small, short page, 1 out of the day, we knew it was God that was calling us. And it was a bonus that we were able to come back to friends and family and to our home church. And so that was a pretty cool time for us to process and to become part of Red Deer again and a part of CrossRoads Church, the new CrossRoads Church. Because I first started in October of 2004. And I believe the first service in CrossRoads was 2003, around December. The role that I came into as executive pastor had a lot of different facets to it. And what Dan was asking for in the board was for someone to just come alongside Dan and be a full support for him so that he didn't have to think about some of the organizational pieces. And what an executive pastor does is they come in and they help with kind of oversight over human resources, HR, finances, facility, the organization, some of the operational things, the internal policies and procedures, those types of things the executive pastor holds. We were a church of about, I think, 1,300 people at the time. We had a staff of, I think the staff was about 13 people. And so you come in and you lead the staff, and so that it actually allows Dan to spend time in the Word, spend time hearing God for what God would say to us as a congregation. And my role is to make sure that things don't get in that way. And at the same time, because of my past at Oro Park and my understanding of ministry, I also came in and started leading the whole ministry piece as well, leading the pastors, making sure that they're tied into our vision, empowering them in the things that they do, making sure that the things that Dan and I saw we needed to do as a church and the board that was being played out in all of our ministries, those types of things. So as an executive pastor, I did operational stuff and also had my fingers in some of the ministry pieces as well. But mostly because I had that skill and that heart desire that came with me through many years of being involved at Oro Park. When I reflect on my time over the last 19 plus years, I think about some of the challenges that I've had to work through. And the constant is always the tension between the things that we dream about and how to make sure that we're empowered and we got the resources that we need to actually accomplish some of those things. And also keeping the team focused on fewer things than more things. And so you're creating policies, procedures, you're making sure that the boundaries are there for people to feel like they're empowered. And I think my role, I've always seen my role as one where my job is to minimize some of the policies and procedures and give our ministry leaders large boundaries where they can go and play and do some really cool things with what they feel God calling them to do, whether it's in children or youth or hope ministries or in missions, those types of things. And at the same time, what are the things that I can do to create some tension on them that helps them and drives them towards our vision? And so you're always minimizing policies, procedures, and maximizing the tension to reach what we dream about. And that is a constant balance for me throughout the years. And I think it's probably when I see the tensions that are there, how do I make sure I keep things on track, within budget, with the resources that we have, and yet also spur our ministries on to great things that line up with our vision and where we're going. When I think about the last 20 years at CrossRoads Church, I think about some key defining moments for us as a church. And there's a common thread that's been there all the way from the start, and that is the idea that reaching people in Central Alberta for Christ so that they could have that relationship with Jesus comes from us as individuals in the church and less from us as an organization. So the things that Dan and I have attempted to do is how do you plant that seed in the heart of everyone that comes to CrossRoads Church so that they themselves walk across the street and engage with those in their life, whether it's at work or play or school, to share the love of Christ. And I think that's been a common theme throughout the whole thing that's formed much of our DNA. And then along come different things that become defining moments for us. And I remember within that first year when I started, we had a large RCMP funeral here. We had about 3,500 people in the building. And if you know our our sanctuary sat about 1,100. So we had 1,100 red coats in our sanctuary. And we had to do this RCMP funeral for one of the constables that were murdered in Mayerthorpe. And it was 2005, March of 2005. And I remember that time forming in us the idea that we could do funerals for people that don't know Jesus. We could do funerals from people outside our church that are just desperate for hope. And from that point on, we started embracing different funerals that we could take from individuals in our community that perhaps passed away that had no hope. And over time, that has, it's like a big flywheel that gets started and it's rolling. And I think today now, last 12 months, we did 31 funerals. And many of them were for unchurched individuals. And it all started back in 2005. And from year to year to year, it's just continued to grow. And so I think that was a defining moment for us to realize it's one way that we can actually serve our community. And it's an unreached community that needs Jesus. When I think about other things that have been defining moments for us, has perhaps been some of our builds. I think about the youth center in 2015 when we gave them the youth center. For 15 years, they had no home here. They were using the cafe. They were using, I think there was, no one's supposed to know this, but they were even in the sanctuary jumping over pews some nights. I guess I'd say that now the pews are no longer there. But they had the gym. They had a smaller chapel. They took over the whole building on their nights with youth. And in 2015, they had their own space, and they've used it in so many ways since, and it's been really healthy for our youth. And I think today they'll have anywhere from 250 to 350 youth walk through that building, through their youth center over the course of a week. And so I think that was a defining moment for us as a church family. It was probably 2008 when we started having a sense of the need for us to, we were actually really good at reaching people for Jesus. But what we were short of is what did it look like in a world that was desperate for compassion? And we never looked at that a lot as a church. And I remember going to Global Summit, we were hearing it there. Our young adults took a team and they went to Kenya. And they came back and said, look, we're missing a piece that we need to press into. And we heard it from a lot of different directions. And it was 2008 when we created our compassion committee at that time. And I remember the board asking the congregation, hey, what would it look like? I think we had a budget of around 3.3 million at that time. And we came to the congregation and said, what would it look like for us to add 500,000 a year to our budget? So more than 10%. And let's commit to 500,000 for 6 years, $3 million. And what does it look like for us to create some projects that was strictly compassion related, humanitarian in their nature, that helped with some of the AIDS issues that were in the world. And so it was really cool. It was a cool night for the congregation. The congregation signed off on it. It was unanimous. Everyone said, yeah, let's do it. There was a little bit of discussion, but they all signed off and said, let's do it. And that changed us. It changed the DNA of our church, because within 2 or 3 years, we had a committee put together. We had wrestled with projects. I defined 3 specific project areas, and we ran after them. And ever since then, after 6 years, it was like, oh, well, why would we stop? And it just became part of our rhythm from year to year. And today, we're still there. We still, our budget for global compassion, we've added a local component to it as well. But it's somewhere between 450 and 500,000 a year that goes into compassion efforts. And it hasn't stopped us from some of our global outreach, which ranges anywhere from probably $350,000 to $450,000 that we are providing for some of our global outreach. And obviously some of that is local in Red Deer and surrounding communities that we provide for some of these things as well. I think another piece that changed us, I'm pretty sure it was 2012, and it was a Palm Sunday. We just finished Palm Sunday, and we baptized 31, 32 people. But I remember in 2012, that was the first time that we did baptisms on Palm Sunday. And we had not done, we do baptisms from time to time for sure. But that Sunday, we opened up the doors to all who would say, I need to be baptized, that hadn't been baptized. And we baptized people that have been a believer for a long time, and they just never have been baptized. And that year we baptized, I forget the exact number, but it was over 130 people. It was a crazy Sunday. It was so much fun. It was wild. But what's really cool is the excitement on that day we experienced this last Palm Sunday. It's the same excitement of people that have been baptized, are getting baptized because they've made a life decision. And it was really cool. And that changed us. We started baptizing people constantly. We did it in the summer. We would do it in the fall. We would do it on Palm Sunday. And I think over a period of, I don't remember the exact count, but in about a 6-year period, we had baptized over 600 people. And it hasn't stopped. We continue to this day. And so we were changed. We're different. I'm not sure what's on the other side of this time. One of the things that I have learned is that God always comes along and says, He's always said to me, well done, let's go again. And I know He's saying well done to me through this time. And I don't know what's next. And I'm wired such to kind of have an open hands posture versus go looking. I don't think in all of my years, I've never been one to go look for what's next. I do my job. I do it well. I try and grow in what I've been asked to do, whether it's been vocationally or just in ministry and as a lay person in helping out with the church. And God has always come along and said, well done, let's go again. And He's given me a greater responsibility. So what does it look like to go on the other side of this huge responsibility that I've carried, for God to come along and say, well done, let's go again. And the going again is an even heightened responsibility. I can't imagine what that is. And I'm open to that. I'm not sure what that is today. And I haven't put my finger on it. I know that what God's doing in me is more important than what He's doing through me. And I want to be there for what God is doing in my grandchildren. And I have a feeling that that is going to be really important, and maybe even a greater responsibility than what I've carried for the last 20 years, is what God's doing in my grandkids. What's God doing in my kids? What's God doing in me and my wife? I think those are good places for me to look and seek out what my part might be. And then maybe something else will come along. We're talking, my wife and I. We're not sure yet. We'll do a little camping. I've got a motorcycle. I think until I start to wobble, I'll probably be on it for a little bit. And I think we would love to plug into, perhaps for a couple, 1, 2, 3 months out of the year, into some mission field and just have some fun and see what we can use our gifts for in those settings. But that's a lot of, right now, just some dreaming. We're not sure what tomorrow looks like. No one has any idea who I am. Like, they have absolutely no idea. I keep telling my daughters, when it comes funeral time for me, you cannot talk about some of the things, because no one has any idea of how goofy I actually am. Because of the uniqueness of our staff. There's some staff that you can play a prank on, and others you just wouldn't. You respect some spaces, not others. But the way I've operated here is my If your door is open to your office, it's free game. If my door is open, I'm free game. If my door is closed, you cannot come into my office and get a key, open my office, and start mucking with stuff. And it's been done, and it is really hard on my head. But in your office, if it's locked, I don't play. But if it's open and I know who you are and I can get away with, I'm playing. I remember once I was in front of I don't know what made me do it. I was in front of Pam Halverson at her desk. She was sitting at her desk, and she has like a pump hand cream on her desk, and it was pointing at her, like, because you're pumping it in your hands, right? And if you're Pam. So I don't know what made me do it, but I'm talking to her, and all I did was like I slammed my hand down on the pump, and she had cream all over her face, her chest, her stomach, like on her arm, everything. It was like massive splatter. And I was shocked as much as she was, but then it was kind of funny. She took it well. But that's me at home. That's a picture of what it looks like at home. So my girls would say, "Oh, well, that's Dad. That's stuff he would do." When I think about stepping aside from my role, I have also thought about the things that I hope never change, that continue and even continue flourishing and even blossoming into even more. And that's this idea of that our church would continue to not miss out on the opportunities we have as individuals of sharing Jesus with people around us. People will come to Christ, our vision in Central Alberta, not because of anything CrossRoads does. It's what we do as individuals. And I'm not sure that all of CrossRoads, the individuals in CrossRoads, realize that yet. We have some core people that get it, know it. But people come to Christ because of the work and the prayers done through individuals. An organization does not lead people to Christ. So I hope that aspect is never lost here. That the leadership, the board, Dan, the staff, continue to press out the importance of the individual capturing, engaging in the vision in their heart for reaching the lost in those that in their family, in the people that they work with, the people on their street, the people that they play with, that heartbeat is never lost. And that we don't give over the responsibility of leading people to Christ to an organization that cannot do that. And I hope we don't lose that. God gave me a picture long before I was ever in this role. I've had 2 or 3 pictures that God's given me that were crystal clear and have been fermented in my memory forever. And the one was understanding, is from Song of Solomon, chapter 4, where it was this picture of Central Alberta being a garden, and Christ, the groom, falling in love with Central Alberta. And this was right around, it was in 97 when we first coined our vision statement to give everyone in Central Alberta an opportunity to have a personal relationship with Jesus. God gave me this picture of how much Christ loved Central Alberta. That he loved walking through the garden. That he had a huge smile on his face. That he would walk with his arms out wide and absolutely soak up the aromas that were in the garden. That the Spirit of God was blowing on the garden, Central Alberta, and that it was creating this aroma that Christ absolutely loved. All the while knowing that in the garden there's places where things aren't blooming, where there's weeds, where there's untilled soil, where there's brokenness and there's heartache. all the while knowing that there's also other places where there's new shoots popping up and there's flowers that are beginning to blossom, and there's really cool things happening. And Christ loved Central Alberta. And it was a picture of a garden that's scene that's from Song of Solomon 4, where the groom is thoroughly enjoying the aroma of the bride and the garden. And the bride is saying, "Come, come, Spirit, blow on my garden." That the groom, Christ, would just thoroughly enjoy his garden. As a picture that has always been there for me, and I don't want that to ever. I don't want to ever lose that in my heart, because I also believe sometimes God gives us pictures for ourselves, not just for the church. And so I own that one for myself. I don't ever want to lose that picture. And I hope the church doesn't. I hope the church doesn't forget the fact that Christ loves Central Alberta. And it takes all of us, our part, to reach Central Alberta for Christ.